Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today is exciting. We're getting stuck into the topic of panning. Let's do it. Before we dive in, please make sure to give me a thumbs up if you enjoy this video. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you know when the future videos are coming. If you do your shopping for your studio equipment stuff in Europe, then please use Toman. I've got an affiliate link up there, down there. Doesn't cost you anything extra, just means a little bit gets kicked back to me and helps me keep making you great content. Let's talk panning. Okay, what is the point of panning? Panning is the process of moving things away from the center of a mix. Traditionally, when we mix music, we mix in what's called stereo. That means we have two speakers, a left side and a right side. When you bring things into your session, when you bring things into your DAW, things will be put straight in the center of your mix. That means they'll be equally distributed between the left and right sides. So everything begins live right on top of each other. Everything is focused down the middle of the mix. That's a great place to start. You don't want to start with things out on the left-hand side or out on the right-hand side. You don't want to start with things all over the place. So having them all starting together is a great starting point. But because they're all kind of overlapping, it means that sometimes things kind of become a bit of a mush. Moving things away from the center of the mix, panning things, allows you to give something its own position in the stereo field, somewhere between the left speaker and the right speaker. So by panning, you're giving something its individual place to be present in the mix and to shine through. That's the purpose. It's all about separation, separating different sounds in your mix, creating space and room in between sounds. That's it. That's the purpose of panning in a nutshell. Okay? Let's listen to the difference that panning makes on and off of this mix. Now, this mix is not a complex mix in terms of panning. The only things that are panned are the rack tom, the floor tom. I've got two guitars that are panned sort of 2/3 to the left and the right each. I have got horn sections. So I've got a trumpet and a trombone and a sax. Trumpet's left, trombone's right, sax is a little bit to the right. And I've got two backing vocals, one a bit left, one a bit right. Those are the only things that are panned in this mix, okay? So I'm going to play this mix for you. I'm going to switch backwards and forwards between the unpanned version and the panned version so that you can hear what a difference this is making, okay? Let's do that.
I'm not trying to say that you're doing something shady, but I don't think I've had any messages from you lately. We used to slide into the DMs from the AMs to the PMs. Remember that? Don't put me on hold. I need somebody to hold. Why am I on hold? If I'm on hold, I'm gonna scream. If I'm on hold, I'm gonna scream.
Okay, so a massive difference clearly between the version that is all down the center and the version with some things panned left and right. In this video and the coming videos, we're going to cover all the kind of technique and basic principles of panning, how you know what to pan, how far to pan it, all this sort of stuff. But the first essential thing that we need to figure out is the sorts of pan pots that we have available to us, because not all pan pots are created equally. So in order to identify the sorts of pan pots that we have, we need to understand a couple of things. In some DAWs, there are differences between the pan pots on mono and stereo channels. A mono channel is a channel that only has one sound source on it. So think about a voice or a snare drum or a bass guitar. Those things, those sorts of things are likely to be on mono channels because there's just one sound source being captured. So if I look at, for example, the drums here, my rack is a mono instrument. My floor is a mono instrument. In fact, all of the tracks in my drum kit are mono, except for the overheads, which is a stereo channel. The overheads are captured using two microphones, a left and a right microphone. That creates a stereo recording with a left and a right side, the same way as you have a left and a right speaker. So when we look at our mono channels, you'll see that as we pan things, we're able to move something to the left or to the right hand side. That's fine. So the principles with a mono channel are simple. Because we've just got one sound source, we can only move that one thing to the left or right side. That's easy. So let's say I've got a tom and I want to move it halfway one side or the other. I just go to that channel and I move it. I say I want to put it over that way. Great. Easy. However, with a stereo channel, it's slightly more complex because you've got two different sound sources that it's affecting. Now, I'll show you a couple of different doors and some of the different systems that you have available to you. You'll have to look at whatever door you use and figure out how your pan pots behave. But in Logic, by default, a stereo channel is set up with what's called a balance pan knob. So rather than it take the whole sound and move it to the left and the right as it does with a mono channel, on a stereo channel, all it does is to literally turn up or down one side or the other. So if you pan a stereo channel to the left, all you're saying is basically just play me the left channel. Don't play me any of the right channel. And vice versa. If you pan it all the way to the right, you're saying, I just want to hear all of the right channel, turn down all the left channel, which is probably not what you want. So you need to look at your door, and probably in your door, what you'll do is the same as in Logic. If you right click on the pan knob, then it'll give you the different options. So you'll see on this stereo channel, it's set as a balance knob by default. If I hit stereo pan, then you'll see that the way it looks changes. And now it will physically move the whole stereo image one way or the other, rather than just balancing and going, okay, more of one side, more of the other. Now it's saying, okay, I'm going to shift the whole image left or right, a bit like the wings on an aeroplane. Okay, so that's a really important thing to identify, first of all, the sort of pan controls that you've got. Now, you'll notice that on a mono channel, you only have your standard pan knob and what's called a binaural panel, which I'm not going to cover in this video because it's quite a complex principle. Okay, but just be aware of the difference between the pan knob that you'll want on a mono channel and a stereo channel. Let's look at a different door. Okay, so here I am in Reaper, totally different door. You'll see that we've got our pan knob down here and slightly less easy to see, but the number on the panning is being displayed kind of here. So you'll see that when I go left, it goes left. When I go right, it goes right. Okay, that's a bit like our balance knob, if you like, on our mono channel in Logic. However, if I right click on that, I have different options. So down the bottom, I've got what's called a dual pan control. So if I hit that, you'll see that now I have independent control over how far the left and right channels go. So it might be that I want to bring in the left halfway, but I keep the right all the way out. That's a really interesting option. Not something that's in Logic, it's there in Reaper. That's your dual pan. You've also got a stereo pan control. And in this option, you've got your stereo panning with left and right. So yeah, you're moving your stereo image left and right, but then you've also got another control on the right-hand side, which controls the overall width of the stereo image. So rather than things going all the way out left and right, it might bring them in a little bit narrower. That's a really interesting control. Okay, so those are the three options that you've got in Reaper. You've got your stereo balance, which is also your mono pan, depending on whether you're using a mono or a stereo source signal. You've got your stereo pan and you've got your dual pan. So some different options there in Reaper. What about in Ableton? Well, in Ableton, you've got your kind of regulation pan control here, going to the left or to the right side. And again, if you right click, okay, you've got an option here that says select split stereo pan mode. And here, rather like in Reaper, now we're able to adjust the left and right sides individually. So you've got different options in Ableton again. So you need to look at whatever door you're working in, explore the pan controls that you have available to you, and make sure you understand what each of them does, because you'll want different ones for different purposes. One of the first vital things that you need to determine when you're starting to pan your mix is to do with perspective, particularly listening perspective. When you're mixing a track or producing a track, you need to think about whose perspective you're going to listen to this track from. Let me expand on that. There are two options. You can either listen to it from what's called the audience's perspective, or you can listen to it from what's called the musician's or the performer's perspective. The difference is that from the performer's perspective, you're effectively sat in the recording, you're part of the recording, you're playing that song. And from the audience's perspective, you're sat out in front of the musicians or the band watching the performance. So they're effectively mirror images of each other. Let's look at a drum kit as an example. Now, I recorded this drummer just yesterday. He was a right-handed drummer, okay? Now, what I've done is to pan this drum kit from what is called the drummer's perspective. So imagining that he's there listening to this recording and he's playing that instrument. So on a right-handed drum kit, the toms go from high to low, from left to right. So the highest tom is up on the left and the lowest tom is down on the right. So you'll see here that I've got the first rack, which is panned to the left, the second rack panned to the right, then the two floor toms panned further down to the right and even more to the right. That is the drummer's perspective, that's the performer's perspective. Conversely, if it was from the audience's perspective, I would just reverse all the positions. So the floor tom would go all the way out this side, the other one would go out there, and so on, okay? However, when you think kind of critically about this, you'll go, well, hang on a minute. What if it's a left-handed drummer? Wouldn't the toms then be panned the other way round? Absolutely they would. So if you've recorded a left-handed drummer, that's effectively the same as panning drums from the audience's perspective for a right-handed drummer. What does that mean then? Well, it means basically that where you pan things comes down completely to personal preference. On a drum kit, for example, do you prefer as the producer to hear the toms going from left to right descending or from right to left descending? That's your choice. All you need to make sure is that you are consistent in your approach. So you don't have toms going from left to right descending on the spot mics, but then in the overheads, they're going in the opposite direction. So you need to work out which direction things are going to go and be consistent with your approach. Traditionally, the more traditional way of panning toms is from the audience's perspective for a right-handed drummer. So you would have the toms descending from right to left. So you'd have the highest tom sort of over to the right-hand side and the lowest tom over to the left-hand side from the audience's perspective, traditionally. I much prefer going the other way around. I prefer to be from the drummer's perspective for a right-handed drummer. You can do what you like. Let's talk about the drum kit as a whole, and let's look at the different instrument components of a drum kit and where they should be panned. Okay, so almost exclusively, the kick and snare will be down the center of your mix. So if we have a look at the kick and snare in this particular drum arrangement, I've got a kick in and a kick out, a snare top and a snare bottom, and they're going to buses. So I've got a kick bus and a snare bus. And you'll see that there's no panning on any of those things. Okay, they're all straight down the center of my mix. That is what you'll want 99% of the time. You'll want the kick and snare in the center of your mix to keep your mix really well kind of grounded and keep those really important rhythmic elements kind of front and center in your mix. Okay, so kick and snare nicely centered. The next thing that you've got is your toms here. Now, we've just talked about toms a bit, so I've got 4 toms on this drum kit. He's predominantly playing in this part, the second rack, the first floor, and then the second floor a little bit. And you'll hear that I've got them panned descending from left to right. There we go. Then I've got overheads, and I've got a room mono, and I've got a stereo room, and then I've also got a crush mic. Let's listen to those things first of all. Okay, now, here's an important thing. When I recorded this drum kit, I was sat here in the studio looking at the drummer in the live room there. So when I've wired up the microphones, I've got overhead mics over the drum kit. The overhead left, if you like, as I'm looking at it here, is over, when the drummer's sat down, over his right-hand side of the kit. The overhead right, as I'm looking at it, is to the drummer's perspective to the left-hand side of the drum kit. Why is that important? Well, because we need to make sure that the position of the toms marry up with the position that they appear in the overheads and the room mics. What I've had to do is, where the signal from the overheads has come in with the left mic being essentially the right-hand side of the drum kit, as I've panned the toms, and the right mic being the left-hand side of the drum kit, I've had to swap them round, okay? I've had to make them match how I want the toms to appear. So I've taken the left and right mics as I've recorded them and swapped them so that they match up with how I've panned the toms. And all I've done to do that is grab a gain plugin, which has got a swap left and right channels option there. So if I take it out here, you can hear that predominantly that floor tom and the second floor especially are actually over on the left-hand side, where the left-hand mic is picking up more of those toms. Whereas if I flip it, you hear that now the floor toms predominantly have gone over to the right-hand side, which then marries up with what I've done with the panning of these toms here. It's really important that those things cooperate with each other, otherwise you end up with a drum mix that doesn't sound cohesive. The exact same thing applies with the room mics. So where I've got a room left and a room right, as I'm looking at it, I need to swap those round to match what I've done with the overheads and to match what I've done with the panning of the toms. So here is pre-swapping the channels. And swap. Okay, so those principles will stand you in really good stead for drum panning. The other couple of things that we could talk about are other spot mics. So maybe you have a spot mic on your hi-hat, maybe you have a spot mic on your ride or on your china, particularly if you're producing metal where you might need something really kind of close up to a ride or to a hi-hat. Exactly the same principles apply. You pan those microphones where they would appear on the drum kit. Okay, so if the microphone for the hi-hat is over on the left-hand side, that's where you pan that microphone. If the ride is positioned over on the right-hand side, that's where you pan that microphone. I haven't got those spot mics here on this drum kit. I've just got the kicks, the snares, the toms, and the overheads and rooms. But if you had them, that's where they would go. Cool, and that's it for this session. We've covered the basic fundamentals of what panning is, the different pan pots that you've got available to you, how you pan a drum kit, and we'll be continuing from that point in the next video, looking at how you pan other different instruments, where things go, how wide you pan things, all those sorts of things. All those questions will be answered. I'll see you in the next one.